Hey everybody, tonight we're debating socialism versus capitalism, and we're starting right now with Dr. Ben's opening statement. Thanks so much for being with us, Ben. The floor is all yours.
All right, thanks, James. So I thought before we start talking about capitalism and socialism, it might be useful to take a step back and think a little bit about the economic systems that existed before either of those ever did. Under feudalism, peasants are legally bound to the estates of aristocrats. And of course, in slave societies, the relations of domination are even more direct and crude than that. And there are different analyses you can give of why these systems went away and were replaced by capitalism. And to be clear, real history is always messy and complicated and multi-causal. So I don't want to claim that what I'm about to say is 100% of the story. But even so, certainly at least one massive element of the story is the one that Marxist historians hone in on, which is that at a certain point, all those rigid feudal rules, those networks of rights and obligations, tying peasants to aristocrats and kings or free towns, and all of that stuff became a hindrance to the development of the forces of production. What does that mean? Very roughly, the idea is that in traditional agrarian societies, those feudal structures were important to keep the peasants in their place while they did the backbreaking work of growing and harvesting crops on a day-to-day basis. As technology progressed, though, and society became increasingly complex and increasingly industrialized, what factory owners needed was a labor force that was what Karl Marx called doubly free. What does that mean to be doubly free? That they weren't bound by feudal obligations to a particular estate, so they were free to move around and make contracts with any employers. That's the first kind of freedom. But also that they were free in the sense of being free from any means of supporting themselves except for agreeing to go to work at the kind of early factories that William Blake called dark satanic mills. Even in the heartland of capitalism in England, that was only possible through a bloody and violent process of enclosure, whereby peasants were driven off their lands. They had no choice but to go to work in factories. And of course, in much of the rest of the world, colonialism operated like a bigger and bloodier version of the same idea. Now, as violent and oppressive as this process was, in some very real ways, the advent of capitalism was a massive step forward in terms of both human prosperity and human freedom. That's what the first few pages of the Communist Manifesto are all about, is essentially prose poetry about that exact point. Once those feudal shackles were torn off the economy, the forces of production developed so wildly that they created at least the possibility of a world where everyone's material needs could be met. And while the justifying ideology of feudalism was a narrow heresy-hunting version of Christianity, where everyone was supposed to obey both kings and priests because they were representatives of God, the justifying ideology of at least the best versions of capitalism has been a kind of enlightened secular pluralism. That's obviously an improvement. But what socialists have always pointed out is that the kind of freedom and the kind of democracy that's compatible with capitalism both come in with severe built-in limitations. That's true in the political sphere because the wealthy capitalists are obviously going to exert more political influence than ordinary workers. And it's true on an even deeper level in the workplace. Under capitalism, freedom and democracy both largely come to an abrupt halt for the majority of the population. They spend at work. During those hours, most people have to take orders from unelected bosses, and depending on what kind of job you have, that can involve a level of control that goes beyond what even most totalitarian dictators demand of their subjects in most contexts. When you go to the bathroom is up to the boss. When you have to smile is up to the boss. And it's only 8 hours because of past workers' struggles, because of the natural tendency of capitalist markets to reduce workers to total powerlessness, to what Marx called appendages of flesh to machines of steel, was counteracted to some extent by the efforts of labor unions and the regulatory state. Another problem with capitalism is that while it does allow the productive forces of society to be developed to the point where there's a lot to go around, in practice, it comes around in just a wildly and grotesquely unequal fashion. Even in the United States, the average CEO makes hundreds of times as much as the average worker, never mind the kind of differences that exist in capitalist societies, less hindered by labor unions and the regulatory state. Look at Brazil or Haiti or Honduras to get some sense of what that can be like. Even in the United States, some people can fly around the world to be cared for by the best doctors and the best clinics when they get sick. And other people die because they're diabetics and the GoFundMes they started to buy insulin weren't fully funded. Of course, some people who are born at the bottom end of the economic hierarchy do end up being upwardly mobile and ascend into a different class position, but it's structurally impossible, given capitalist ownership relations, for everyone to be upwardly mobile. If everyone was upwardly mobile, there'd be no one left to grow the food or stock the shelves of grocery stores, and we'd all starve to death. To meaningfully empower the great mass of the population, you need to change the system. So, what would that look like? I don't think the kind of top-down state command economy that existed in the Soviet Union is a good model. It was often economically dysfunctional in at least some important ways, and it was held together by denying people important rights. But rejecting the idea of any kind of alternative to capitalism, because the problems with that alternative would be ridiculous. That would be like saying that one proposed course of treatment isn't promising, so you should just give up and let the cancer spread through the patient's body. Instead of either giving control of the economic machine to a tiny handful of state bureaucrats or a tiny handful of wealthy capitalists, the goals of human flourishing and human freedom can best be served by finding ways to create a society that's more democratic rather than less democratic than the one we live in right now. Figuring out exactly what such a society could look like in practice is difficult, but we can find elements that have been beta tested under capitalism that could be put together to come up with a system that does away with the need for capitalists. We can look at successful worker cooperatives like Spain's Mondragon Corporation. We can look at democratic governments that have nationalized key industries and successfully run them in the public interest, like the healthcare sector in Britain, for evidence that we don't need to divide society into a class of workers and a class of capitalists to have a functioning economy. Now, we could argue more about the details of what that could look like later on, but I just want to make one last point here, because that if you want to argue that capitalism is better than what existed before capitalism, or that some proposed alternatives to capitalism are flawed, hey, we agree. But if you want to give me any reason at all to accept the counsel of despair that says that capitalism is the best that humanity can possibly do, all your work is still ahead of you.
You got it. Thank you very much, Ben, for that opening statement. And want to let you know, folks, if it's your first time here, welcome to Modern Day Debate. I'm your host, James Coons, and we are a neutral platform hosting debates on science, religion, and politics. And we hope you feel welcome no matter what walk of life you are from. We're glad you're here. And with that, we're going to kick it over to Tom. Thanks so much. Tom, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Ben, I'm hearing like a little echo from you. I don't know what that is. I think it's picking up two of your mics or something.
Oh, it wasn't just me then. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination. I did hear that too, Ben. There might be, I think about halfway through your opening, I didn't want to interrupt because it was subtle, but there is a bit of an echo, and halfway through, just at the same time the echo started, there was kind of, your volume seemed to change.
Yeah, it seemed like it changed mics, changed to a different mic.
It's at least subtle, so that's why I kind of let it go for the opening in case anybody else could even hear it. But we'll kick it over to Tom for your opening, and then we'll bring it into open conversation. So thanks so much. The floor is all yours, Tom.
All right, so if people want to start worker co-ops, that's totally fine, and it's already an option in capitalist systems. Like, capitalism doesn't stop you from creating a worker co-op, but people don't want to do that. People who start businesses don't want to start a worker co-op. They have the option, they choose not to. So the only way to institute a socialist government is by government force, because people aren't going to do it on their own because they don't want to, and that's wrong. If you want to have the option of worker co-ops, which I think is a good thing, we already have that under capitalism. So the question here is, what exactly are you arguing for when you're advocating for socialism? Are you arguing that we should force people to start worker co-ops without their consent? Because I definitely think that's wrong. If you're arguing that we should allow people the freedom to start worker co-ops, they already have that. So I don't know what the benefit here is. By adopting socialism, you're just essentially using government oversight to force people to adopt a system you prefer without their consent, which is bad. This leads to tons and tons of problems. The centralization of power to cause people to do stuff they don't want to is why most socialist governments fail and become China and Venezuela and Cuba and all the bad countries, because too much power gets easily corrupted and taken advantage of. And so this is not a good system if the way that you're going to adopt it is by forcing people to do what they don't want to do on their own. So allowing workers to decide what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits is stupid. Most employees are not qualified to make these decisions. It's like a business that would be majority vegans in a meat industry would probably shut down the meat plant. Like, obviously, if you started a business to produce meat or whatever, and you have a whole bunch of vegans who get hired unbeknownst to you, and then they all decide they want to like cut out the meat and or just do only grass-fed or only humanely grown meat that just destroy your business, like, well, there's nothing you can do about it because, well, democracy rules under socialism. And so this is a bad idea. What if a bunch of Muslims become the majority in a country and they want only halal meat? Well, then your business is kind of screwed because that's not something the market necessarily wants. So the people who are qualified to make the decisions about what you should be doing with the company, like what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits, is not the employees. They're not the ones who are best qualified to do this. You hire specific people who are qualified to do this and let them make the decisions. So this system of allowing the workers to decide isn't a good system. I mean, we've made similar arguments for politics that only educated people should vote so we don't end up with Donald Trump as president. Democratic rule isn't always a good thing when it's put into systems. There's bad consequences to it, especially allowing all of your workers to decide how the company should work, because they're probably going to make things easier for them, which can have good benefits, but it can also have really bad benefits too. So it's not a good system to adopt in the first place. Moreover, if there is any problem that socialism is trying to solve, it can be solved better with other systems that don't involve socialism. Like any problem socialism wants to solve, you can do it better without socialism. There's nothing that socialism is inherently good at solving that you just can't do with just modified capitalism. Like I agree with what Ben said. Capitalism is not the best humans can possibly do. Like, I don't know if anybody who would actually claim that, but it's better than socialism because it doesn't have as much of centralized power. It doesn't have as much corruption. It has a much better track record in human history. There's lots of negative side effects to socialism because of these core issues that make it a significantly worse prospect than capitalism. So, like, for example, the main disadvantages of socialism is that it's slow economic growth, less entrepreneurial opportunity and competition, the lack of motivation by individuals, lesser rewards, it creates distorted and absent price signals, results in reduced incentives, causes reduced prosperity, has low feasibility, and has negative social and political effects. And we can see this by just looking at the majority of socialist countries throughout history. Like if we just go through the Wikipedia list of current countries that are Marxist-Leninist states, you got China, Cuba, Laos, and Vietnam. Non-Marxist-Leninist communist states that reference socialism in the Constitution be like Algeria, Bangladesh, Eritrea, Guinea-Bissau, Guyana, Korea, India, Nepal, Nicaragua, the Portuguese Republic, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, Sri Lanka, Tanzania, former Marxist-Leninist states. There's a ton of those, all of them same general area. You can go down the list to non-Marxist-Leninist socialist states: Burma, Cape Verde, Chad, Congo, Djibouti, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, Guinea, Iraq, Libya, Madagascar, Mali, Senegal, Syria, Leone, Sudan, Syria, Tunisia, Zambia. Current states with governing communist or socialist parties: Algeria, Angola, Argentina, Bangladesh, Barbados, Bolivia, Congo, Djibouti, et cetera, et cetera. Like, notice that I haven't said any of the good countries in this list. Like, none of the good countries are on this list. All of the good countries that are usually falsely attributed to be socialist are actually mixed economies. So Norway, Denmark, Ireland, Netherlands, Brazil, Italy, France, UK, Germany, all mixed economies, just like the US is. The US is a mixed economy also, and mixed economies maintain a private ownership of control of the means of production. And none of these mixed economies have a majority socialist parties in government, because nobody in those countries wants socialist parties in power. This is not a thing that people want. Just for those who don't know the difference, in market socialism, prices are determined by the government, and the goal is to achieve market equilibrium, while in a mixed economy, prices are determined by the market shifts, although the government can intervene to protect the citizens to prevent economic inequalities. Mixed economies and market socialism mainly differ in the degree of interference of the government in economic sphere. The government plays a bigger role in market socialism, while it mainly acts as a safety net in the case of mixed economies. Moreover, private property is protected in mixed economies where common cooperative public ownership remains one of the main features of market socialism. Both systems allow for competitive competition among enterprises, but in market socialism, firms are not, or in very few cases, privately owned. So, in essentially, we can already do socialism. We can already have co-ops in a capitalist system. People just don't choose to do it. So what is the means by which you're going to adopt this system? It seems like you have to use government power to force people to adopt this because they just don't want it. And doing that causes a centralization of power, which leads to the downfall of essentially every socialist government that has ever existed because it's so easy to corrupt. So it's not a very well-ordered system. It doesn't have a good track record of success. In theory, it's a great theory. Like, I think that giving everybody more rights and more freedoms is a great thing, but there's a limit to your ability to do this in a pragmatic way that doesn't cause the collapse of the economy. And that is something that we just don't have the ability to overcome yet. So maybe in the future, when we have our AI overlords and they can just solve everything, then we can all become communist socialist pandas and the AI takes care of us. Totally fine. I'm pro-socialism once we have AI overlords. But since humans have to do the ruling currently, we need some kind of a system that can mitigate humans to some extent, and giving all the power to government is not a good way to do that. So my question to Ben would be is what things can socialism solve which can't be solved in a better way without the problems associated with socialism? Because I think there aren't any. I think that anything you could do with socialism can be done better without socialism.
You got it. We will jump into open conversation. Want to let you know, folks, we are absolute.
Sorry, James, that I thought we were going to do the same time since with humor, you said.
Oh, you're right.
What?
I am totally wrong about that. So we do have timed rebuttals. And so, Ben, forgive me. I am totally dropped the ball on that in terms of putting a post-it to remind myself. How long were the rebuttals?
10 minutes.
You got it. Thanks so much, Ben. Sorry about that. And so we will kick it over to Ben for that rebuttal, and want to let you know, folks, we are absolutely thrilled about many more juicy upcoming debates here, including, folks, it's going to be a juicy one. We are bringing back Flat Earth tomorrow night, so don't miss it with Fight the Flat Earth. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. That way you don't miss it live. So with that, thanks so much. Ben, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, so that was a very strange opening statement because most of it seemed to be devoted to arguing against not only nothing that I'd said, but things that I'd explicitly disavowed and explicitly said that I wasn't saying that. I think about half of it was reading from Wikipedia, a list of countries that were either Marxist-Leninist or had socialism in the Constitution, which was apparently taken as a reason to think that these are countries that have socialism in them, even if it's an entirely private economy. If the word socialism is mentioned in the Constitution, I guess that makes it socialist in Tom's estimation, which strikes me as a very strange methodology. I think you'll find if you use the same one for democracy, you're going to get some very strange results. The People's Democratic Republic of Korea, the German Democratic Republic, and lots of other examples. So obviously, just having the word socialism, mentioned at some point in the Constitution is going to tell you less than nothing about the economic system. That's, I think, that more than enough to deal with that. Otherwise, we're talking about countries that have the economic system that was the alternative to capitalism. I explicitly said that I was not arguing for in the opening. Made a point of saying that for a couple minutes, and which is the kind of top-down state command economy that that was pioneered in the USSR and then replicated in other places. There was an implication at one point that the way that that kind of capital C communism had come about in other countries was because of attempts to create socialist democracy, attempts at workers' control of production, but somehow workers just didn't want to have a voice and a vote in the workplace, so they had to be forced on everybody, and then suddenly you had Stalinism. Needless to say, that bears no relationship whatsoever to what happened. What actually happened was that communist parties that were ideologically committed to the Soviet model long before they took power replicated the Soviet model, which was the explicit intention all along. Now, that's not my model for what a post-capitalist society should look like. What is the model that I advocated for a socialist post-capitalist society should look like? Well, I mentioned two examples. of elements that have been successfully beta tested under capitalism, but that could be put together to form a society that didn't have capitalists. One is that democratic governments have successfully nationalized some industries like healthcare in the UK and run them in the public interest. The other was successful private sector worker cooperatives like Mondragon. We also got in that recitation, the first three countries that were mentioned were China, Venezuela, and Cuba. I thought it was a little funny to include Venezuela in there, especially if we're going to, say, oh, well, there's nothing socialist about the Nordics, because the public sector in Venezuela at the height of Hugo Chavez's welfare state was actually smaller, much smaller than the public sector in any of the Nordic countries, the chunk of the economy that was directly controlled by the state. In fact, the number of Venezuelans, the percentage of Venezuelans who worked for the public sector, even at the height of Hugo Chavez's welfare state, was smaller than the percentage of Frenchmen who worked for the French public sector. It's not that much higher than in the United States. So I'm also a little confused. Putting aside all of this, the Stalinist straw men, by the combination of two claims that I heard both of in there. One is that any problems with capitalism can be solved with regulated capitalism, with modified capitalism, with the sort of stuff that socialist parties, by the way, who absolutely are elected in democracies all the time, have implemented in countries like Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Finland, all of which got their welfare states under Labour or Socialist Party governments. So that was one claim. That kind of Nordic halfway station, was good enough that we can have, modified capitalism could solve anything that socialism could solve. The other claim was that it's a terrible, terrible injustice to say that as a result of a majority of working class people voting into power a socialist party, you could have requirements that firms give a voice and a vote to workers. Because this was forcing people. And of course, you can use the exact same force argument against any of the things that would go into modified capitalism. Minimum wage, hey, if people wanted to hold out and only work for firms that would pay them that wage or above, nobody's stopping them. That's allowed in countries that don't have minimum wage laws. So if you want to impose that higher wage floor on them, that's force. You could say the same thing, of course, as libertarians do about things like the nationalized healthcare systems that exist in some of those countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like you can praise modified capitalism, or you can use the force argument against socialist government extending democracy to the workplace, but you really can't do both. Final point, I guess, when I was hearing about how most people aren't qualified to make democratic decisions. That if you had workers do what they do very successfully at Mondragon, very successfully at the cooperatives in the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, which is to elect managers, to vote on an operating agreement, which is the equivalent of a union contract, but with no boss to negotiate it with, that workers just aren't qualified to do those things. Or what if the workers want the wrong things? Like what if the firm wants to sell meat, but most of the workers are vegan, and I guess they just can't find people who aren't vegans to work for them. Then all I could think immediately is, man, this sounds like exactly the kind of argument that could be used against political democracy. We all agree, I would assume, that that 99.999% of the people listening to this have the correct position that democracy is good in the political sphere. So, wow, when I get my chance to speak, that's what I'll point out, that this is that the same argument could be applied to that. We all agree that that's wrong. And then I was very surprised when Tom embraced the conclusion that democracy is a bad thing in the political sphere. All I have to say about that is, if you think that the problem with Donald Trump is that the United States has too much democracy, I mean, I don't know where to start with that. That's a very strange claim. If you look at polling data on most Americans' preferences about things like what kind of healthcare system we should have, whether we should be continuing all these wars in the Middle East, and a lot of other questions, the results would be very, very, very un-Trumpish. The choices that people have are very limited by the two-party system, but even there, if we had just a little bit less democracy, Trump would still be president, as he tried very hard to override the will of the voters. So the connection between Trump and too much democracy is lost on me.
You got it. Thank you very much, Ben. And we will kick it over to TJump. We want to let you know, folks, both of our guests are linked in the description. If you want to hear more from our guests, you certainly can by clicking on those links down below. And that includes if you're listening to the Modern Day Debate podcast. You can find our guest links there as well in the description box for that podcast episode. With that, we'll kick it over to Tom for his rebuttal as well. Thanks so much, Tom. The floor is all yours.
So first thing, Ben confused an opening with a rebuttal. Like, my opening wasn't meant to refute his position. It has nothing to do with his position. It's my position. My opening wasn't meant to rebut things he said in his opening, obviously. I didn't mention Soviet Russia at all in anything I said. I just mentioned that of the current mixed economy states, the majority political parties in power are not socialists. The people in those countries don't want majority socialist parties in power. They vote them out of power. They are very rarely in power, almost never. I wasn't mentioning Russia at all there. That wasn't the point. So I don't think he actually refuted anything I said there. So socialism has a terrible track record of failure. The fact that you can cherry pick a few cases where it's actually worked is fine. Like, yeah, I mentioned worker co-ops. Yes, they can work. Do they always work? No. So is that a good example that this is a way that something we should implement on a government scale? No. Cherry picking examples is not that. We can cherry pick all kinds of crazy stuff and claim that that's somehow a good way to judge what our government should be. It's not. The point about people are stupid. People can make stupid decisions. The fact that, like, Donald Trump is an example of that doesn't mean that it's always bad, or that it's necessarily the case in all that democracy itself is bad. It's just obvious that people can make stupid decisions. So we should probably not let a bunch of random people make all the decisions for every one of the companies. That's not a good idea. Again, cherry picking a few examples that work, not a good example, or not a good basis to conclude that this is a good policy that should be adopted for every company. No, definitely bad. So yeah, if people want to adopt socialism, that's great. Like, if they vote in socialist parties and those socialist parties choose to adopt socialist government policies, that's fine. I'm okay with that. People don't do that. So how would you adopt it? Because that's not going to happen. Like, mixed economies are fine, and mentioning that other countries have adopted mixed economy policies that are not socialist economies, yeah, that's good. I'm for mixed economies. The US is a mixed economy. But again, this is not in any way evidence of socialism or that we should adopt socialism. So I don't know why he mentioned that at all. Kind of irrelevant. So again, my question is what can socialism do better that capitalism or any other modified system can't do without all the problems of socialism? Because I don't see any.
We will kick it into open discussion mode. Want to say, folks, thanks so much for your questions so far. If you happen to have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat. If you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, that makes it easier for me to see that question, and then super chat is also an option. And with that, thanks so much, gentlemen. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess as far as what socialism can do better than capitalism, we can, talked about that very extensively in the opening statement. Capitalist societies produce obscene levels of economic inequality. Those produce obscene levels of political inequality that you're just not going to have. Jeff Bezos is not going to have the same level of political influence that you and I do. Those seem to be unsolvable problems under capitalism. Poverty.
So can we stick with those for a second? How exactly would you solve those under socialism? Because under socialism, it seems to be more the case that there's more economic inequality and more political inequality in all of the different socialist countries that currently exist, even though you think they're not socialist, no true Scotsman.
Well, I mean, okay, first of all, that's not what no true Scotsman means. That's a bizarre way to use the phrase no true Scotsman. No true Scotsman is when you start out with a definition, and then there are examples that meet your original definition, and then you say, oh no, those don't count, and you move the goalposts. In this case, socialists, going back to Marx and Engels, we're talking about a radically democratic alternative to capitalism, had talked about workers' control of the means of production as the essence of what they meant by socialism. There are socialists going back to Rosa Luxemburg the year after the Russian Revolution saying, hey, that's not what we're talking about. So you have an uninterrupted tradition. So I mean, given that that's not historically what socialism meant, I'd say this is less like No True Scotsman than like somebody saying that, you're doing No True Scotsman if you say that somebody who was born in Nova Scotia wasn't born in Scotland. It might use the same word, but that's just a different concept.
Okay, that didn't answer my question. So, I mean, obviously, I think that's false. I think that socialism...
Explanation of why the premise of your question was just flatly false.
Well, that wasn't the premise of the question. That was more like a comment.
The premise of the question was that those countries are socialist. If not, the question was just irrelevant to the discussion at hand.
So your opinion of socialism, I don't care. I don't care about your opinion of socialists. Every economist agrees these are socialist countries. They're founded on socialism. Whether you disagree, I don't care. So give me an examples. How can you solve economic inequality and political inequality with a socialist government? Because all the mixed economies do it with capitalism just fine. I don't see any examples of socialist companies or socialist countries that have produced more economic equality or more political inequality. It's all capitalist mixed economies.
Yeah, so I mean, the answer was already given in the opening statement. By the way, I know the difference between an opening statement and rebuttal. I'm just surprised that after in the opening statement,
could you answer the question?
Was not, in fact, yeah, I already answered your question. I'm going to point this out, and then I'm going to answer your most recent question. I clarified in the opening statement that what I meant by socialism, what socialism always meant by socialism, has absolutely nothing to do with that model that you're talking about. But nevertheless, your response was your opening statement was entirely about that model, which struck me as odd to just go ahead with it even after finding out that that was irrelevant to the debate. But sure. I think that how could socialism not generate the economic inequality that capitalism could generate? I think that if you look at actually existing worker cooperatives, the gap between the highest paid and the lowest paid worker is unsurprisingly a tiny fraction of what it is in normal firms, because you have to convince people to democratically vote on wage scales. In Mondragon, it's something like 11 to 1 is the maximum, as opposed to hundreds to 1 in regular Spanish firms. And the claim that modified capitalism has solved economic inequality seems very strange to me. That no, you still have in any kind of capitalist system, no matter what reforms are enacted, and by the way, reforms that are enacted while keeping the basic structure of capitalism in place are always very vulnerable politically, because wealthy elites will always try to erode or reverse those when they get a chance. But if you look at those countries, yeah, you absolutely still have a class of people with the financial means to own businesses, and a class of people whose financial means give them no realistic choice except to work for the first one. Economic inequality is not solved even in the Nordic social democracies, which are the best societies that exist in the world today because of the past successes of elected socialist governments.
Okay, the thing here, I didn't say they were solved. I said they're better than all socialist examples. So you cherry picking a few worker co-ops isn't good. I can just cherry pick the bad worker co-ops. Like in Minnesota, there was tons of worker co-ops that had riots and wars with each other, that had worse policies. So picking a few worker co-ops and saying, here is some cherry picked examples of where my model works, and ignoring all of the misses is not evidence. You've just cherry picked a few successes and ignored all of the misses. Clearly, that system as a whole system doesn't work in its entirety, and it will lead to equal or greater inequality than the capitalist systems. Now, I don't say capitalism has solved these problems. Never have I said that. They're just better than the alternatives for the time being. And obviously, we're getting better as time moves on. We're making improvements to capitalism to try and solve these problems. But that's the correct path. Not adopting socialism. There's no reason to do that here. So you just saying, here's a few cherry-picked worker co-ops that it worked, doesn't give me any reason to accept that we should adopt socialism to solve political or economic inequality, because I can just look at the bad examples of worker co-ops and show, they also fail at a higher rate than capitalist systems.
False.
Okay.
They don't fail at a higher rate. The existing research on worker co-ops shows that they get started at a lower rate, but once they're up and running, they tend to last about as long as regular capitalist firms. It's absolutely not true that worker cooperatives fail at a higher rate. Also, the thing that you're referring to in context of this last question is cherry picking. Was me making the obvious point that the rate of economic inequality within firms at worker cooperatives is in every case I've ever heard of, maybe you can come up with counterexamples, and I think there are good reasons to think this will always be the case, much lower than the average rate at regular capitalist firms, because if you have an owner who can make a decision about how to distribute profits and has vastly more bargaining power than any of the workers who sign employment contracts with them, then you're going to get vastly more inequality within the firm than if everybody who works there gets to vote on the wage scales. That seems like a strange hill to die on.
Well, I wasn't comparing to the average here. I was saying you could cherry pick examples of both and say, if we cherry pick these best examples, you can make the data look good for either one. So yes, we can do that.
It's not a matter of cherry picking. The point is that, like, statistically, worker cooperatives, once they get started, do seem to last about as long on average as regular capitalist firms. That's one thing. The other thing that I think you're referring to as cherry picking is the claim that that wage scales at worker cooperatives are much more egalitarian than at regular capitalist firms. I don't know if you're calling that cherry picking, but I'd be, But I mean, this is
average. So I can average pick certain firms that have more balanced.
Average out every single cooperative that exists. Average out every single revenue.
That's the cherry picking. I don't care about the averages. We can cherry pick different ones that do it fine either way.
Exactly the opposite of cherry picking.
No. So you cherry picked an example, and then you're comparing. Well, no, stop. Ben, hold up. You cherry Ben. Hold up.
I have to let you here because this is the point. Cherry is the exact opposite.
Ben, if you don't understand my point, let me elaborate on it. Then you can comment on it.
All firms of that.
Ben, if you don't understand the point, let me elaborate on it so that you can then respond. So
explain yourself this time. Please try.
I explained it perfectly well. You didn't understand. That was kind of the problem. So Ben.
Okay.
Hold up, Ben. Stop interrupting. Ben, stop interrupting. Stop interrupting. Let me finish.
All right, we might have to go into 3-minute intervals here in a second, guys.
So cherry picking the successes of worker co-ops and comparing that to an average is obviously wrong. The fact that you mentioned that worker co-ops are started significantly less often than normal capitalist countries means there's a far larger base to go from in capitalist countries. So like I forget what it's called. In immigration in America from Nigeria, we immigrate the best examples because they're the ones who are coming into America, and so they have a higher average of wealth generation, IQ, whatever. And so it seems like they're better off because we've selected the best ones and are choosing from that group to try and make a disparity between racial classes or whatever. It's the same thing here. The fact that the people who start worker co-ops aren't just random people who can start businesses. They are the ones who have the money to do this and who have the connections to do this. So you're cherry picking the best examples and then saying, the best examples of the very few people who actually start these, they do well. Congratulations. If I cherry pick from the best examples of corporate environments, I can get a better number than yours easily. The fact that since we're taking an average of a bunch of people starting a bunch of businesses at all income levels, comparing it to the very best of people who are allowed to start work co-ops is not a fair comparison. So it's cherry picking. You're just cherry picking data from the best, comparing it to the average of people of every spectrum and then saying, clearly the work co-ops are better. No, that's false. But you still haven't answered my question. Like, you've given nothing that can explain how economic inequality or political inequality is solved by worker co-ops. You've just, again, cherry-picked some of the best ones, which I can do too. So you've given nothing. And again, all of these can be better solved by capitalism in every way.
We'll kick it over to Ben for just a bit over 2 minutes, so it's matched.
So first of all, I see what the problem is now. You don't know what cherry-picking means. So you're saying you're making a claim that you're described as cherry picking that has nothing to do with what cherry picking means, because obviously talking about every worker cooperative that exists as one point of comparison, and talking about every regular capitalist firm that exists as another point of comparison is not cherry picking. It has nothing to do with what that means. Now, you can argue this is not cherry picking, but you can argue that the sample size of every worker cooperative in existence is too small. I think it might be bigger than you think, but fine, fair enough. You can argue that it's too small for a comparison. But what I find fascinating is that in your explanation of why you think it's too small, you are completely contradicting the premise of one of your anti-socialist arguments from earlier. You said, we clearly don't need to use the political process, to use the power of the state to give workers these rights in the workplace, because any workers who wanted to own their own firms just could already. It's already allowed. So why do you need to force it? But then just now you said, well, any worker cooperatives that's getting started, that must be because these are workers who are in the unusual situation of having the money and connections to be able to do this. So it seems to me that you'd have to pick one. Finally, you keep making this very strange claim that I have not explained why it is that workers' control of the means of production would lead to smaller wage gaps, even given market socialism, based on private sector worker cooperatives. And that's just not the case. I've explained it several times, but I'll explain it one more time, which is that if everybody at a firm gets to vote on the wage levels, though, on the wage scale, that wage scale is going to be much flatter and more egalitarian than the wage scale that you're going to get from regular capitalist ownership relations. I think that would be an extremely straightforward point.
You got it. We'll get over to Tom.
So yeah, obviously false. Obviously, you don't know what cherry picking is. If you select of a very minority group, like immigrants from Nigeria, if you take all immigrants of Nigeria, that's still cherry picking because there's a select feature about them that makes them different from the comparative group. The fact that it takes a certain group of people to create a worker co-op, and like a single individual given the option between worker co-op or business they own, they're going to choose business they own. So in order to create a worker co-op, you need to have a group of people who you want to do this with. It's not just like random person X wants to start a business. Like, I'm going to go with a business co-op. Not a thing. So there's a very specific kind of person who goes with that. Usually people who've researched it, who wants to implement it in a certain way, who has some kind of background in economics to know what the impacts are going to be and how to run it. They're the ones who are choosing to make worker co-ops, not just random person X who wants to start a business. So there's a clear difference between the people starting worker co-ops and the people starting random average capitalist businesses. Most people who start businesses want capitalism, regardless of any kind of background knowledge. Most people just don't know about worker co-ops in general. And so most people who start businesses won't start worker co-ops. So it's clearly cherry picking of a certain group who starts a certain kind of companies, not because they're not able, anybody could start a worker co-op, but because they choose not to for various reasons. Just like many people who immigrate in the US, they potentially could, they're not allowed to because we're choosing the very specific best ones who are already qualified in the field and they're going to succeed at a higher rate automatically. So it's obviously cherry picking. Like this is super simple. I don't know why you don't understand this. Again, and my comparison to my question is what can socialism do that capitalism can't? I can pick examples of socialist or capitalist companies that do better than many co-ops. Capitalism can do this too. This wasn't a question of can socialism do some better than some capitalist systems? No, my question is can you do this without adopting socialism? The answer is yes. There are many capitalist countries that can do this and have much better equality levels than America without adopting socialism. You don't need socialism to do this. Nothing you said says that socialism is required to accomplish this. That was not a thing.
That's 2 minutes. We'll kick it over to Ben.
Yeah, so it is interesting that sometimes you seem to understand what cherry picking means. You'll actually explain it correctly. You'll say picking examples, and then you start pretending again that examining an entire category and comparing it to an entire category is cherry picking. That's just, I feel a little embarrassed. That's just not what it means. But more crucially, of course, there is a structural reason why you have much more egalitarian wage scales at worker cooperatives than regular capitalist firms. It's not a matter of looking at one capitalist firm or looking at one cooperative. There is a general structural reason, which is that if wage scales are set by an owner who can do what they want as long as they can get someone with vastly less bargaining power to accept it, you're going to end up with much, much less egalitarian wage scales than if everybody gets to vote on it. I mean, this just seems like an incredibly simple point. I'm very surprised that you're not getting it or understanding it. I'm not sure what's going on there. But if we're looking at other things that capitalism can't do, I mean, the example that we had was general economic inequality, and I said that under capitalism, you generate so much economic inequality that you get these wildly inegalitarian relationships in the workplace, and you also get wildly unequal levels of political power. Just saying that there are capitalist countries that due to doses of socialism that have been administered by elected socialist governments have less inequality than the United States is very different from saying that you can have that you are going to get enough inequality under capitalism that those two things that I mentioned are not going to be the case.
So, I mean, what you said is, again, demonstrably false. Like survivor bias, you're comparing an entire group of survivors to an entire another group. And guess what? That's still cherry picking. It's literally survivor bias for that reason. You not understanding how fallacies work is your problem. Secondly, again, as I said, give me an example where these socialist countries are that you're naming, because none of the countries have socialist governments. It doesn't happen. Like all of the socialist parties in those governments, none of them are the majority party. It's not a thing. You can just go to socialist parties in governments, go down to ones not in power. You'll find Norway, Denmark, Ireland, Sweden, all of those places have socialist governments that are not in power. There are some seats that they have. None of them are the majority. The majority are mostly capitalist Democrats in lots of ways. So again, what you're saying here makes no sense. You're saying, we elect Democrats who put in market mixed economies, like, just like America does. What? And then socialism. No, it's not socialism. That's mixed economies, just like America has. So you haven't given any examples of successful socialism at all. You just picked mixed economies and said, socialism.
Okay, none of that bears any relationship with anything I said. I trust that anybody who's been watching this knows that what Tom said has literally nothing to do with anything that I just said. I don't know if he was just zoned out while I was speaking or he just decided to make something up, but none of that stuff I said. What did I say? I said that doses of socialism administered within capitalism, such as nationalizing the healthcare sector, for example, have led to enormous human progress when those have been implemented. And it is just a historical fact that they were largely implemented by elected Socialist Party and Labor Party governments in those countries, which have been in and out of power in many of those countries for a long time. And quite recently, that those have made those societies more livable. I did not claim, and in fact, I said the opposite of the claim that those were socialist countries. The claim that I've made is that we can look at elements that are that have been successfully beta tested under capitalism, namely democratic governments successfully nationalizing certain sectors of the economy, operating them in the public interest, namely successful worker cooperatives, and see that it is in fact quite possible to have a society that doesn't have capitalists with a functioning economy. The fact that we don't have one that's fully achieved that yet, not because they tried and it was unsuccessful, but just because they haven't gotten there politically, is neither here nor there. I mean, if we were arguing at a point in history when no democratic republics existed yet, all you had was maybe a certain amount of constitutional monarchy, but with the king still holding lots of power, you could say, aha, no successful constitutional republics yet. It would be exactly as irrelevant. So you're also shifting the goalpost in a very strange way on this cherry picking issue. That you're talking about survivorship bias here, which is a different claim than cherry picking. But yes, sure. If you're going to look at successful worker cooperatives, then you're looking at the worker cooperatives that have survived. Just like if you're looking at successful capitalist firms, you're looking at the capitalist firms that have survived.
That's about time.
Is that once they get started, they tend to survive at about the same rate.
We'll kick it over to Tom.
Wow, you're just totally incapable of understanding the points here. It's pretty simple. Like survivor bias is an example of using an entire group and comparing it to another entire group, and that can still be cherry picking. This wasn't literally saying survivor bias is a fallacy or using in comparing cooperatives versus non-cooperatives. The point was just what you said earlier when you said comparing an entire group to another entire group is not cherry picking. It's just demonstrably false. I can give you an example where you're doing exactly that. It's called survivor bias, where you're comparing an entire group to another entire group, and it's still cherry picking. You not understanding fallacies is kind of the problem here. So you admit that there are some socialist policies that are similar to socialism, which are adopted in mixed economies. So mixed economies like combinations. Yes, I agree. Mixed economies work. These are not examples of that we should adopt an entirely socialist government. This is an example that we should adopt a mixed economy, which I'm for mixed economies, not for socialism. So you're saying, mixed economy, here are a few examples of it working in a few cases, therefore let's adopt an entirely socialist government, does not follow. Again, cherry picking a few examples of successes, saying that, we should adopt the whole thing, doesn't follow. So again, what we should do is what we're currently doing, taking a capitalist approach and adopting a mixed economy of taking certain protections, policies, and adding those in. And that's good. Your system is not good. All of the examples where socialism has ever been tried has always failed. You claiming it's not real socialism, no true Scotsman, isn't relevant. People want to say that, here's our idea of socialism. We're going to try to adopt this. And to adopt this, we have to give lots of power to government. And they're probably like, we have lots of power. We can abuse it now. That's socialism. That's what happens. So this is not a good policy. If you want to implement socialism, it has to be voluntarily. You can voluntarily create a co-op. You can voluntarily vote socialists into office. That's fine. Using government power to force everybody else to do it without consent is bad.
Yeah. If I were you, just as a piece of friendly advice, I would not try to run this thing about logical fallacies. I think we can compare notes there, and that's probably not going to be promising for you. But as far as the point about mixed economy systems, the argument is about whether the kind of socialism that I'm describing is economically possible, whether there's a reason to think that if you had certain key sectors of the economy be nationalized, if you still needed a market sector because of calculation problems, coordinating consumer preferences with production, you could at least have a market sector of worker cooperative firms that, if you're going to say, is this workable? Well, if there were examples of an attempt to create exactly that, we could look at those and use those to consider it. But failing that, in the absence of any examples of that, what we can do is we can look at the individual elements of that. Worker cooperatives as a whole. How do worker cooperatives generally do as compared to conventionally organized capitalist firms? And we can also look at examples of democratic governments taking certain key sectors like healthcare out of the market and see how that does. And if you think, okay, these things can work individually, but when they're put together, they would not be able to work. There's some particular reason for that. I think we would need to hear the reason, and we certainly haven't heard the reason or anything like it yet. This no true Scotsman claim, I've already explained why that's just wrong. I mean, you're just misunderstanding what no true Scotsman means. But forget it. Forget the question of whether you call it socialism or not. Let's just call what we have right now Xism, what existed in the Soviet Union Yism, and the combination of a democratic government nationalizing some industries and running them outside of the market, and a private sector entirely consistent of worker cooperatives, Zism. We could completely sidestep the terminological issue.
And time.
True that the bad parts of the track record of Yism are just going to be irrelevant to the question of whether Xism or Zism would be better.
Kick it over to Tom.
So the question is, if we try to adopt Zism, it leads to Yism, I think was the communist parties. So the problem here is that if we try to adopt Zism, the policies to do that lead to government overreach, which then become abused and corrupted, which leads to Zism. That's the problem. It's not that they are literally the same thing. Obviously, China isn't literally just giving public ownership to the means of production. It's China. The problem is it's a result of trying to adopt socialism, because the only way to adopt it is through extreme amounts of government oversight, which is bad. So again, you're not understanding fallacies is your problem. I'm definitely going to defeat you on every single one of those, hands down, without even trying. But separate topic. So again, the issue here is what's better? Should we adopt, as you mentioned, a complete system with all of the companies like this, or is it better to take just the mixed system? I'm saying mixed system is better. Always. It's always going to be better than adopting your system. Your system is going to fail for the reasons I listed in the intro, that it leads to less competition, gives people less opportunity to grow, gives successful people less opportunity to grow their business, gives less control over the people who actually have the right state of mind to make the right decisions. I think it's going to fail more often than it succeeds in making successful decisions, because it hasn't been implemented. If you could demonstrate it has been implemented, other than just your hypotheses that a complete system adopting this would be better, that would be great. Until then, it's reasonable to reject that and to adopt the system that we know works and has been proven to work and has done an extremely well job of benefiting human life over the past several hundred years, which is a mixed economy. We know this works. We have lots and lots of evidence this works. Does it work perfectly? No. Do we have any evidence that your system works? No. Zero cases.
Okay. The thing about logical fallacies is bizarre. The couple that you've mentioned, you've proven that you have no idea what they mean. There are lots of informal logic and critical reasoning textbooks that are easily available. You can buy them. Go on Amazon tonight. You can stock up on some. I would recommend reading up on this if this is something mostly you know about from the internet. But in both of the cases that you mentioned, you're just wrong. As far as the relationship between Yism and Zism, if you want to claim that attempts to create Zism would collapse into Yism, then you certainly haven't made that case. The point was already addressed earlier that it's just not the case. That China and all of these other irrelevant examples that you're reading off from Wikipedia in that opening statement were attempts to create socialist democracy that just somehow turned in to Stalinism and Maoism. As a matter of historical fact, that's not how that happened. These are countries where there were revolutions that were led by Moscow-aligned communist parties who had a pre-existing ideological commitment to the Soviet model, and who, of course, carried out that commitment once in power. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Yism will become Zism claim. And certainly what we've seen over hundreds of years of capitalism is that these features that I'm talking about, like the creation of severe economic inequality, like the absence of democracy in the workplace, like the existence of poverty, are built in, they're baked in. There's never been a capitalist version of capitalism that has done away with this. We can look at a small local example in the United States and look at the fact that Juneteenth was last month. We just passed 156 years since the emancipation of slaves. And through that entire time, capitalism has failed to correct the persistent economic inequality between the descendants of slaves and the descendants of people who were free in 1865. It's certainly the case that regulatory states and labor unions can sometimes make progress, push that boulder up the hill of sanding off some of the worst edges of capitalism. And then, of course, the wealthy elite, every time they have a chance, will start pushing that boulder down again with austerity and reversing those previous gains. But what I really just want to emphasize is that you seem to really want to have it both ways. That on the one hand, sure, yeah, mixed economies, great. On the other hand, the government imposing a democracy in the workplace because the majority of workers voted in power voluntarily to do that thing is some version which could be applied to anything that makes those mixed economies mixed.
We'll kick it over. We've got to kick it over. We'll kick it over to Tom for 2 minutes.
As I said before, if the majority of people vote in socialists, that's fine. That part I'm okay with. So if you convince the majority of people in a country to adopt this, that's fine. As I said multiple times in the beginning, there's no contradiction there. But they're not going to do that, as we've seen in every single country, even the modern mixed economies. Nobody adopts socialist-run countries. Nobody adopts the socialist majority parties. It doesn't happen. Good luck convincing them. It's not going to happen. Go for it. But again, so that's not a contradiction. I'm literally saying you're not going to convince them. Nobody wants this. It's a crap system. People prefer giving themselves power, so they're not going to adopt a social system. I don't know why you keep mentioning capitalism hasn't done away with poverty and inequality. Like, no one's ever done that, and we're not going to do that for a very long time. Your system does not do away with poverty or inequality either. Your argument is that it makes it slightly better, not that it does away with it. That's not your argument? Okay, I'll ask you about that later. So the capitalist systems have been doing away with poverty and making things significantly better for everyone for hundreds of years. Like, it makes things better, always. Like, the amount of people in poverty around the world has gone down by like 50% or something. The people live on $1 a day or whatever. Things are getting better under the capitalist system. And they can obviously be continued to be made better by using more capitalism and modifying capitalism to make it more fair, like the mixed economies have done. The question is would your system make that be an even better improvement, or would it be worse? And I'm saying it's probably going to be worse. It's probably nobody wants that. Nobody wants that because it's bad in many reasons for all the ways I listed in the introduction. It lowers lots of kinds of things. There's all kinds of papers that show that it lowers competition, lowers, I forget what I mentioned, but they're all listed there, and I have papers to show it. So this is not supporting your position. Like, obviously, no one's going to solve poverty and inequality. You're not going to solve poverty and inequality. The question is who's better.
Okay. I don't know how you heard me say that in actually existing worker cooperatives, as a category, the average difference between the highest paid and lowest paid worker owners is a tiny fraction of what it is in normal capitalist firms. I'm not sure how you heard that and said that my argument was that it would make it slightly better. My argument is that given workers' control, it's not structurally possible to create the runaway levels of inequality that you have under capitalism that make a mockery of political democracy, because you're going to have wealthy people who have vastly more political influence than everybody else. That perpetuates capitalism by making it the case that the majority of the population, who, as you said in the moment of lucidity earlier, do not have the money and connections to be able to start a worker cooperative, have no realistic choice except for to give up most of their rights and freedoms for 8 out of every 16 hours a day. That level of inequality, the kind of inequality where the bottom end is going to be grinding poverty, of course, would not exist given workers' control for reasons that have been explained several times. The saying that you'd be fine with socialism if a majority democratically opts for it makes me a little confused about what you think we're arguing about here. But if you say that a majority of the population is never going to support that, well, there certainly are historical examples where a majority of the population has supported it. So just to, I'm not making a statistical claim here, but just to go with one example that springs to mind, Chile in the 1970s, the democratic socialist government of Salvador Allende was picked by a majority of the Chilean electors on a very radical socialist platform, and of course, as is often the case when that happens, the United States took the view that Henry Kissinger famously said, just because the citizens of the country are irresponsible doesn't mean that they should be allowed to go communist. That's certainly not the only example of that. But of course,
we've got to kick it over.
Would happen.
We've got to kick it over. Thanks so much, Tom. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those didn't turn out so well, did they? So I'm ready to go to Q&A. I've stated my piece.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It did. I mean, the example I gave certainly didn't turn out very well, but not because of any problem with socialism.
You got it. Well, want to let you know, folks, because I know many of you have many things on your mind, and so oftentimes at the very start of the debate, I say, hey, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future upcoming debates. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of people, you guys have things on your mind, all that good stuff. So I just, in chat, hit the button for subscribers only chat. It's temporary. We don't mean to twist your arm into subscribing, only because, as I mentioned, a lot of times people miss it up front. And so want to encourage you to subscribe, be in the chat if you haven't already hit that subscribe button. And with that, we will jump into the questions. Thank you very much for your first question. This one coming in from, you guessed it, Logical, Plausible, Probable. Thanks so much. Says, congrats on hitting half-century mark. Everyone, push that like button and let's help James to get to 100,000 subs. Thanks for building an awesome channel. Thanks so much, John. And we are excited. We're celebrating. It's a thank you celebration for 50,000 subs tomorrow. So you don't want to miss that one, folks. We're going to have votes and all sorts of fun stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun, but thank you. And Brenton Langle, thanks so much, says, TJump. Donald Trump never won the popular vote.
True.
And said he loved, quote, low information voters, unquote. Anti-Dem arguments using 45 as an example make no sense.
I mean, that's a fair argument. Yeah, he wasn't elected by the majority. It's the stupid electoral college thingy. But yeah, the point was here is that a lot of people being put into situations can make stupid decisions. There are still 49 million people who made a stupid decision there. So I'm not sure that's a great example that we should just give lots and lots of people the right to make the decisions about how a government or how a company should use what it should produce, how it should produce it, where it should produce it, and what it should do with the profits. I'm not sure, given how bad that many people are making decisions, that it would be a good idea to do that.
Gotcha. And Lewis Barnett, thanks so much, says, is social democracy the best of both systems? Guess we'd hear from either of you.
No, I think that it's the best that's been achieved so far, for sure. That social democracy, has by redistributing some resources away from capitalist profits to meet various human needs, taking certain sectors of the economy out of the markets, etc. Has been, those are definitely the best societies that humans have created so far. But I think that there are two problems with stopping at social democracy and not going for full workplace democracy. One problem is pragmatic. The other is ideological. The pragmatic problem is the one that's already been mentioned. Rosa Luxemburg's metaphor about reformism is the labor of Sisyphus. You're pushing the boulder up the hill, and it's being pushed back down again. That if you leave the capitalist class of business owners with their economic power, concentrated economic power will always find ways to translate into political power, and they will always use that to chip away at whatever reforms have been enacted so far. At the end of the day, if you want to avoid that, you have to, as Michael Brooks used to put it, you have to start taking some pieces off the board by democratizing the economy. That's the pragmatic problem with stopping at social democracy. The ideological problem with stopping at social democracy is, even though those are certainly better societies than the United States, much less what the United States has imposed on much of the rest of the world, they're still societies where most people have no realistic choice except to spend half the hours that they spend awake most days taking orders in a really draconian and authoritarian way from unelected bosses. And I think we can do better.
You got it. We'll jump into this next one from...
I don't get a chance to answer?
Oh, that's right. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's fair. Like, obviously, social democracy is probably one of the best systems we've achieved so far. It's probably not the best ever. There's probably going to be more. But if you're going to make a claim that you know of a better system and it's never been tested, you have a much higher burden of proof than the one that we know is the best system so far and has worked in lots and lots of cases. So if you're making the presentation that you have a better system than the best system, that's like saying you're smarter than Einstein. You've got a lot to do to show that. And I don't think there's any evidence to support socialism even comes near what that would require.
Yeah, I mean, literally all evidence from actually existing worker cooperatives show that that's an efficient way to organize businesses. I understand that doesn't impress you, and you think that for some reason that's unrepresentative of what that would be like in a system that was dominated by those. You certainly haven't given us any reason to think so.
We must go to the next one. Do appreciate your question. Etho Logo says, congrats on 50,000 subs. Thanks for all of your hard work. I value these convos immensely. Thanks for your kind words. Amazing. Want to say, the debaters are the lifeblood of the channel. People like Ben and Tom have seriously made this channel rockin' awesome and fun. And so we want to say thank you to them. And thank you to all of you for all of your great debate ideas, folks. So thank you so much on this super positive and encouraging night. And Don Folman says, intellectual honesty is in a state of recline. Is that...
It's my channel motto, intellectual honesty is in a state of recline. Buy TJump merch.
Very juicy. And Brenton Langle says, the co-op was in Minnesota. Sorry about that. The co-op wars in Minnesota were caused by the CIA. Check out the deep dive on the Dollop podcast with Dave Anthony and Gareth Reynolds for more info.
Seems like a common socialist agenda thing. We always blame America if it ever fails. If socialism ever fails, it's definitely America's fault. Always. Never just because socialism just leads to China. Nope. It's always America's fault.
Juicy. This one coming in from Do Appreciate It. The Legend Rivs says, socialism destroys savings and investments, which which determines a good economy. The response is always more regulation and inflation, which destroys the economy. How does socialism solve this huge flaw?
Yeah, I'm just not clear what the questioner thinks that they're talking about. It's certainly not. Presumably, they're not talking about any sort of attempt to institute economy-wide, or at least private sector-wide, workers control of production. I assume that they don't think that they're talking about that. I don't, I hope that they're not talking about social democracy, those, doses of socialism administered within capitalism, as opposed to socialism as a complete system after capitalism, which, as we just agreed, are some of the most successful countries in, making societies that are livable for humans that have ever existed. So they must be talking about some third thing. Maybe they can clarify that.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. This one coming in from Pigs Are Intelligent as Dogs. It says, Ben, do you condemn Mao's China, USSR, and Venezuela? Yes or no? Clear answer, please.
Well, when somebody asks a complicated question, say they only want to hear yes or no, then I'd say that intellectual honesty is not only in decline but decline. So I think that certainly I'd condemn the authoritarianism of those systems. I think that that some of them at certain points did accomplish things that made people's lives better, but also there were real horrors that took place under there. But those real horrors happened because of the absence of democracy. The feature of Mao's China that allowed the Great Leap Forward to happen, for example, which would certainly not have happened and continued if Mao and Zhou Enlai and all those people had to worry that they were going to lose re-election, was the extreme absence of democracy. So if this is supposed to be an argument against socialism in the sense of extending democracy to the workplace, I don't really understand how the argument works, because in this case, we're talking about countries that not only did not have democracy in the workplace, they had less democracy overall than regular capitalist democracies, and that's precisely why these things happen. You don't get a great leap forward in a country where the electorate has a way to take leaders out of power. You don't get the Ukrainian famine in a situation like that. So yeah, I think that these are cautionary tales about the absence of democracy. Unlike Tom, apparently I'm a big fan of democracy. I'm such a big fan of it. I want to extend it to the economy.
You got it, and thank you very much for your question. Made by Jim Bob says, and it's not related, but I'm so curious to get your guys' opinion on this. What do you think of the film Cuties?
I haven't seen it.
No idea what you're talking about.
Sure, Tom. Okay, next one. Brenton Langle, thanks for your question, says, TJump is ignoring the entire anarchist movement. You can build socialism without centralizing power. It has happened multiple times throughout history.
The anarchist movement? I don't think that's a good strategy to go with, but okay.
Next up, thanks very much. Made by Jim Bob strikes again, saying, Tom, oh gosh, Tom, I hope this isn't. They say, Tom, is that chair the only thing you have left from your grandma? Is this, please tell me this is like a sincere, not kind of mean super chat about your late grandma.
Yeah, my grandmother died, and you should just send me all the money from the super chat. Like, no, it's a joke. I got this from Lazy Boy store.
Gotcha. Okay. Whew, I started sweating. Okay. Pigs Are Intelligent as Dogs says, if co-ops are so good, why not just wait a bit? People will see co-ops are better than traditional companies and will start doing them to beat the competition, right?
Wrong. I think that this is a argument that's beloved of libertarians and other advocates of a pure laissez-faire system, and at least they're being somewhat internally consistent when they make it in a way that advocates of a mixed economy would not be internally consistent if they made this argument, because as was mentioned earlier, you could apply the exact same argument to any other reform that curbed capitalist power. You could say, oh, if having if a minimum wage was so great, then everybody would just opt to only work at businesses that offered a minimum wage. You could say if laws against sexual harassment, are so great, then everybody would just choose not to work for sexually harassing bosses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's exactly the same argument. Obviously, realistically, it's not the case that most people are going to be able to do that. If you have a system in which it's an option to be the sole owner, then even people who do have the means, which most people most of the time do not, to try to strike out on their own, most people are going to take that option. And of course, there are only a certain number of lifeboats out of the working class. It's structurally impossible for everybody to take it, but most people are going to try to do it that way. There are tons of built-in competitive disadvantages there. Most obviously, that if you by definition can't reward investors with ongoing ownership shares, or else to the extent that you did that, you would to that extent cease to be a co-op. That makes it harder to start a co-op than a regular capitalist firm. Obviously, the fact that ordinary working class people really are a bigger risk for banks giving out loans than people who have some means. That's going to be a structural disadvantage for co-ops. And all of these things make it harder to start them. Of course, again, the statistics that exist, we can argue about whether the sample size is big enough, but the statistics that exist seem to show that once they get started, they do about as well. But I would suggest that if you want to know whether most people would just like taking orders and don't want to have any autonomy, don't want to have rights at work, don't want to have a vote in management elections, or whether they do, probably the best way to test that is not whether people, make make a desperate attempt to pool together what little money they have to start a small business that will probably fail, as most new businesses do. The best way to test that is to see what happens politically, to see if you can build a majority through the political process to support socialism. I know Tom thinks that that's impossible, despite there being past examples of it. But in general, the idea that, if most people wanted the economy to be different in some ways, it would just come about as a result of micro interactions, I think is a bad argument that would be rightly rejected in every other context by anybody who's not a stark raving libertarian, and it should also be rejected here.
You got it. And thank you very much, Amanda, for your super chat via Venmo. Folks, we do have Venmo. Modern Day Debate is our call, or you could say our handle on Venmo. Amanda says, 50K celebration. Thank you, Amanda. I am pumped for it as well. And so, as I mentioned, it is a thank you celebration for our guests like Ben and Tom, as well as for all of you for your ideas, for debate topics, things like that. We are pumped. And so thank you so much for that support. This one coming in from Farron Salas says, we have officially hit dumpster fire status in the chat. Thanks, debaters, and Coonsmeister, Coonzarelli, Coonsin for a bruisin'. Amazing, juicy debate. Couldn't agree more. It has been a juicy and fun one. Will Stewart, good to see you again. Says,
yes, the amazing thing that Jesse Lee Peterson references. There's some backstory here. I don't know.
That's right. We like amazing. We can't stop saying it here. And we have several cliches that are. What's the purpose? Oh, when people use it ironically. So we do call people beta in the chat sometimes ironically. But next, Will Stewart says, Ben, what evidence do you have that a pure socialist nation provides more benefits than capitalist nations?
Well, what I'd say is that the main reason to think that some forms of socialism can't have lead to functioning and prosperous economies is the calculation problem, the issue about how to coordinate production with fine-grained consumer preferences in the absence of market signals, or the lack of efficiency that can enter into an economy without firm failure. But the good news is that what we do know for sure from those mixed economies is that it is entirely possible to have a successful economy where some sectors are taken outside of the market. So let's say, use the most pessimistic projection like Tom. I think that, in the future with the development of AI, who knows, right? Maybe we could have a much more radically demarketized version of socialism. But in terms of what can logistically exist right now, sure, let's take that worst case scenario from the calculation problem and say there's no way to do it without having market mechanisms, without having price signals, and without having firm failure. You can have all that and still have it be the case that the market sector, those firms, are at least collectively owned and democratically run by the workers. And if you're going to say, no, that can't work, that, unlike the worker cooperative sector that exists right now, this wouldn't be successful, you have to give a reason for that. It can't be the calculation problem. It certainly can't be the history of countries that have completely different systems than the ones being described. So maybe there is another reason to think so, but I'd say at that point, the burden of proof is very much on the person who says that can't be, that that for some reason that hasn't been specified, you have that you just cannot successfully operate a market sector where all of the firms are owned by workers. Maybe there's some reason why that would be the case. All I can say is I haven't heard it.
You got it. And striking again, Will Stewart says this time, Ben, if I am willing to work for $5 an hour because I am not qualified to work a salary job, why should I not be allowed to?
Yeah, so I like the fact that the questioner actually embraces the analogy that I keep making, that they say, that this argument against legally imposing democracy at work, saying that you can't deny people a voice and a vote in the workplace, is exactly the same as the argument that you can make against minimum wage. That in both cases, sure, if we want to pretend that under regular capitalist conditions, workers and capitalists have as much bargaining power, then you're shorting, you're harming a worker by not letting them voluntarily agree to those arrangements. If you make the more realistic assumption that obviously it's vastly harder for a worker to replace their source of income than for a capitalist to replace one worker, then that argument doesn't work. And I think that people are more likely to have their preferences met in situations where you have a legally imposed wage floor, that the effect of not having one is that people are going to be forced into those arrangements by economic conditions. And similarly here, and we can argue about what's legitimate, to be imposed in economic structures, but and what the legitimate role of the state is. But one thing I'm definitely not worried about imposing on people, is the ability to vote in management elections if they choose to exercise that ability. I think this idea that you're going to get hordes of people under those circumstances saying, no, damn it, I don't want power. I don't want to have the option of voting in a management election. I want to not be allowed to vote on that, strikes me as a tad unrealistic.
You got it. And so thank you very much for this. Alex, appreciate your super chat, just supporting the channel. And also thanks so much for your question. Will Stewart is coming at you, Ben. He's like a dog with a bone. He says, I believe I asked, what evidence do you have? Not what assertions do you think make sense, Ben?
So I guess Will Stewart thinks that if a specific proposal hasn't been implemented yet, the correct procedure is something other than looking at what the closest equivalents that have been implemented yet, looking at places where on a smaller scale or in part of the economy it's been implemented, looking at whatever precedents that you can find, and then trying to reason, looking at that and then combining that with reasoning about what would make sense, given just the structural incentives that are built into the system. Like, are you going to get, more egalitarian or less egalitarian wage scales if you let everybody vote on them? Will Stewart apparently thinks that there's some other procedure that you should use. But if his idea for that procedure is that if something hasn't happened yet, the default should be that if it hasn't been completely implemented yet, that you should just assume that it would be a disaster. That's an argument that could be applied at literally any point in human history to argue against literally any piece of progress that hasn't happened yet. And I hope we can all see the problem with that.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. Bubblegum Gun, more of a statement, says, anarcho-capitalism is the only tenable position. Fact.
I think there's more of a contradiction. I don't think you can have anarcho-capitalism. Because any type you have in anarchy, it's going to lead to some people have bigger stakes than other people. And then you don't have, then they start a government. So now you no longer have an anarchy.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. This one coming in from Forward Tribe says, Dr. Ben, can you explain Venezuela's recent history and explain Portugal's fantastic economic dynamics in the last 40 years?
Okay. So I'm not quite sure where he's going with the Portugal part. Maybe you could clarify that. But as far as the Venezuela part goes, I think that you can certainly look at success. I mean, what Venezuela is or was at its height. There's been a lot of austerity and cuts since then. But what Venezuela was social democracy. I mean, that's what existed in Venezuela. The vast majority of the Venezuelan economy was always privately owned. There was never a point where that wasn't the case. And in fact, again, vastly smaller public sector than several of these other mixed economies that we have been talking about. I think Norway is a particularly fun point of comparison because Norway and Venezuela are both places where the size of the public sector was inflated by a publicly owned oil company. But yeah, so given that, I'd say that if your explanation of what happened in Venezuela, which, I think that part of that explanation certainly has to do with economic warfare against it, most obviously by the United States. Part of it has to do with severe missteps by some extent Chavez, but really Maduro in especially in terms of currency management. That's definitely a part of the picture there. When oil prices started to crash and other oil producing economies were able to suffer some temporary losses, but then get better. I think that they made some extremely short-sighted currency management decisions that exacerbated and led to bad cycle. But the one thing that you can't really say if you're going to be intellectually honest is that socialism caused this. Because if by socialism you mean a society that's not divided into a class of workers and a class of private business owners, then Venezuela is not and never has been socialist. It's always had a predominantly capitalist economy throughout the entire time that Chavez was in power, throughout the entire time that Maduro has been in power. If what you mean by socialism is social democracy, then nope, that doesn't work either, because there are other countries like Sweden and Finland and Denmark and Norway that have gone much further in a social democratic direction than Venezuela has, and the same effects haven't happened. So yeah, I'd say that bare minimum intellectual honesty, we can rule out those two explanations.
You got it. And thank you very much for your question. You guessed it. Will Stewart, do appreciate it, buddy. And he says, let me just boomer tech over here. 1 second, the page is loading. Want to remind you, though, while we're waiting, our guests, Tom and Ben, are both linked in the description. Folks, if you haven't clicked their links, what are you waiting for? They're right there in the description box at the very top. This one from Will says, the assumption I have is, if no evidence, then we can say, let's try and find out but not assert it will be better.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can, if no evidence, sure. I dispute no evidence. I don't think that you need to go all the way to a fully democratic socialist economy, since, as we agree, right, there aren't any examples of those. That we have countries where reforms have been carried out by elected socialist governments that have gone a certain distance in that direction, but while still leaving most of the economy in the hands of capitalists, have made people's lives better, but have certainly not transcended capitalism and gone to socialism. That in the absence of that, there's no evidence. I think that's just an unjustified leap. I think that there is evidence. I think that you can if you want to know, can you have a energy sector be successfully run by a democratic state? Then there are numerous countries that have done that. And that we do have evidence for that. If you want to know, can the healthcare sector be successfully run by the democratic state, then we do have evidence for that. We can look at examples of that. All of that is fully compatible with saying that yes, but you can't have a fully state-owned economy, without economic dysfunction because of calculation problems. Fair enough. So you might still need a market sector, but then the question is, does that have to be a market sector of conventional capitalist firms, or can it be a market sector of worker-owned firms? And I'd say, see earlier in the debate, we very extensively disagreed about this and went back and forth, but I think I've laid out my reasons for thinking that the existing evidence from the existing examples as a category does give us a reason to think that would be successful. Now, if we had somehow, for some unforeseen reason, things that are very successful a la carte turn out to be disastrous for some reason when put together, then okay, since workers can democratically vote to restore power to capitalists, I'm not quite sure what anti-socialists are so afraid of.
You got it. And Bubblegum Gun strikes again with a twofer. This time, two statements saying, quote, democracy is cringe. Read some Aristotle. Fact. Next, they also say, TJump, you can't have mafias when Walmart sells tanks.
What?
They're talking about when he said he likes anarcho-capitalism, and you said that capitalism wouldn't work with anarchy because everybody who has the biggest stick would trample over the people with the smaller sticks. Nobody has a bigger stick.
Well, if Walmart's selling tanks, Walmart has the biggest stick, and Walmart is going to be the government. Like if Walmart is selling the tanks and they just have a big resource of tanks, they could just use all the tanks to take all of your other stuff too. Like why would they sell them to you? They'll just keep the tanks and then just take all of your stuff.
Juicy. And this one coming in from Do Appreciate It. Zirafa, good to see you, says, why has Israel been steadily turning away from socialism since the late 1970s?
So, I think that Israel is I think is a pretty funny example on multiple grounds as a as a test case that there has always been a large sector of the working class there that has been disempowered to a pretty farcical degree. If you wanted to start talking about socialism, that the minority of Palestinians who ended up as citizens of Israel were completely deprived of any democratic rights for the first 19 years of the existence of the state. Certainly have been systematically excluded, from every level of Israeli society. But I also think that outside of the agriculture sector, where you had the kibbutzim, I'm not quite sure what I guess I'm just not quite sure what the questioner has in mind as far as what they think are are sort of failed doses of socialism administered within Israeli capitalism. I know, for example, the socialized healthcare system there, I believe, is very popular. But I think that, I'll answer the more general question, and then if it's okay, just indulge me. I do want to very quickly do the Aristotle thing, because I was hoping to jump in on that earlier. So the very general answer to that question about why is it that you have countries that have enacted various social democratic programs, have implemented have implemented reforms that arise from socialist aspirations, even if they don't amount to
short and pithy
full socialism, that have turned away from that. And I think that answer has been given, that as long as you leave the capitalist class in power, they're always going to roll down that boulder back down the hill as soon as they feel politically able. On Aristotle, I just say that, yeah, I'm not surprised that an apologist for slavery wasn't a big fan of democracy, but I'm a little confused about what that's supposed to show.
You got it. And this one coming in from Left is Best says, TJump, why do capitalists ignore the effects of blockades and sanctions on socialist economies?
I don't understand the question. Like, yes, those definitely have an effect, but not literally every example of socialism was stopped because of U.S. interference. That's just not a thing. So yes, it does have an effect. Yes, we can have an effect. It doesn't mean that's literally every single case of socialism failed because of America.
You got it. And then this last question, we've got to get out of here soon, but Just Call Me Toast, Plain Toast says, can TJump explain why the socialist policies of Allende, thank you, didn't work out so well, quote unquote?
I imagine it's the same thing. It was probably from interference, most likely. I don't know the specific case, but I'm guessing that's what they're alluding to.
Gotcha. Juicy. And Will Stewart has one last one saying, Ben, your assertion was that pure socialism was better than capitalism, not that it, quote, could be successful, unquote.
Yeah, I mean, the reasons that I've given for thinking that going beyond social democracy, democracy at the workplace, are straightforward. They've been given at quite a number of times during this debate. They're not based purely on a priori speculation. We have empirical evidence that I've mentioned, which is that we can look at actually existing worker-owned, worker-managed firms that have existed under capitalism, and we see that they lead to dramatically more egalitarian outcomes. Like a fraction of the economic disparities that you get within standard capitalist firms. That seems like an excellent reason to think that the kind of economic inequality that's generated by capitalism wouldn't be generated even by this kind of democratic market socialism, never mind what might exist in the future given developments in AI, et cetera, that TJump referred to earlier.
You got it. And folks, we are going to wrap up. I want to remind you to check out the links at the very top of the description of our guests, as we really do appreciate them. And I'm going to be back here in just a moment with a post-credit scene, letting you know about juicy upcoming stuff at this channel, including some votes that I think you're going to dig. So stick around for that. But before we go, I want to say thanks so much, Ben, and thank you so much, Tom. It's been a true pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, James.
Thanks.
My pleasure. So I'll be right back in just a moment, folks. Stick around for that post-credit scene coming up. Amazing. Thank you so much, my dear friends. Thanks for your patience. All right. You guys, I am so pumped to tell you about some juicy upcoming stuff. In particular, folks, some juicy, awesome stuff. One, thank you so much. I haven't gotten to see you since before we crossed the 50,000 subscriber threshold. Amazing. So thank you guys. Seriously, I cannot thank you enough. Thanks so much. I see you there in the old live chat. Good to see you, my dear friends. Sideshow Nav, as well as Bubblegum Gun and Reservoir of Gore and La Tornado and General Balzac, Amanda, Nikki, Quebec, Foie Gras. Thank you for being here as well. And Silver Harlow and Creo Debunk, Alex, Stinger GT2, YouTube Surgeon General, Ken Lee, and Haxed. And Lee, we are glad you were here, as well as Mark Reed, Andrew, Amanda, Bremen's Name, Daniel, and Vlad Tapes. Thanks so much, my dear friends. Want to say seriously, I am excited about the future. We are planning big stuff. Tomorrow we are going to have a vote. Now, we know what, several things to announce. One quick announcement. If any of our debates get too juicy for YouTube, if you know what I mean. By that I mean if they start to perhaps rub up against TOS, we will put them on the podcast. So, for example, this one on the far right of your screen is on the Modern Day Debate podcast and only on the podcast. You can't find it here on YouTube anymore. We did live stream it here on YouTube. So if you were there that night, I know some of you were, but if you weren't, the only way you can watch it, or I should say listen to it now, is via the Modern Day Debate podcast. So that, if we ever have any debate where you're like, where'd that go? Check out our podcast, because it's probably the case that it might have been a little bit too, So in that case, we'll put it on the podcast, and we have to take it off of YouTube. The reason being, we don't want an STRIKE. So, you guys, I am so excited. Travis Pratt, good to see you. And then Hunter Thompson, thanks for coming by. As well as Oliver Catwell, thanks for dropping in. And yeah, I'm excited. Thanks. Devin Embleton says, amazing. I couldn't agree more. I'm excited, though. I predicted that we would probably maybe reach the 50,000 threshold around mid-July. I was almost certain. I was like July 14th, maybe July 15th. So I am excited. It has been super encouraging, you guys, to see Modern Day Debate grow. And I cannot say anything other than thank you. For real, you guys have made this channel epic. You've made it fun. This channel is a truly eclectic mix of people from all walks of life. Politically left, politically right, we are glad you were here, friends. Christians and atheists, we are glad you were here. Muslims, we are glad you were here. Gay, straight, you name it. Black, white, everybody and their mama. We are thrilled to have you here at Modern Day Debate. So you guys, so much excitement about the 50,000 threshold. And you guys, I have to tell you, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, don't get me wrong, I am super thankful and super excited about the 50,000 threshold. So I'm not in any way saying as if it's something that's not epic. It is epic. But I've got to tell you, our impact on YouTube is even more epic. I always peek around out of curiosity. I'm kind of sick like that. I always, out of curiosity, kind of look around on Social Blade and other websites that show stats for other channels, and we pretty consistently have way more impact in the form of views, people actually watching our content, compared to channels that are sometimes double our size. I mean, sometimes we have way more impact even than channels that are significantly bigger than us in terms of subscribers. So I am thrilled about our subscription, you could say our subscriber 50,000 landmark, and I can't thank you enough, folks. Seriously, you guys make this channel rock. The debaters make this channel rock. I'm just a guy in the background sending emails, folks. Seriously, I shoot out emails hey, this person's open for a debate. What do you think? You want to, and they're like, yeah, sure. So that is I'm trying to remember. That's that's David Letterman impersonating Jay Leno. Maybe. So the idea, though, is this, my dear friends, is I'm just a guy that shoots emails and you're like, hey, this person's looking for a debate, stuff like that. But you guys make this fun because it really is. It's a fun experience here in the chat. I know some people, it's funny. A lot of times the people who say, oh, this chat is toxic. It's so problematic. That's the key word now, like the problematic. Oh my gosh. It's like these guys, they're the kids that, oh, bless their hearts. I'm sorry, but they're the kids that they got a trophy for losing. They just, man, life's just a little too rough for them when they see people that disagree with them. So where they, oh, it's toxic if there's people disagreeing with me. But that's what makes it fun. Look at it, folks. Is that we have people from all walks of life. People who will disagree in the chat with each other. And we always ask, like, hey, can you do it in a way that you attack the argument instead of the person? Like, yeah, we're reasonable. We'll ask for that. And we'll even, if people are being malicious, if they're being malevolent, we'll bring the hammer down. The mods, they're sadists. They like putting a little pain on people who are breaking the rules. But the idea is we're like, hey, we're going to let people disagree. And sometimes that's going to offend people. But the thing is, folks, it's authentic. It's a true, you could say, battleground of ideas where it's like, hey, the most persuasive ideas are the ones that win out. And I think that's a good thing. Now, there's so many interesting branch offs from here. But I want to tell you, though, it is exciting, folks. It's so fun to have you here. An eclectic bunch indeed. I mean, we've got Bremen's name. Thrilled to have you here, my friend. And says, my name's in a YouTube. You rock, James. Congrats. Thank you for your kind words. Bremen's name. I don't know what Bremen's name's background is. Who knows? Maybe it is Scientologist. We don't know. Church of Entropy. A pantheist hippie. We are thrilled, no matter what. We got Hannah Anderson. I'm pretty sure, do I remember right, Hannah? Atheist or agnostic? I'm not sure, but the idea here is this. We've got, I think, Sunflower is they say they're a Christian. Do I remember right, Sunflower? Have you told me that, or am I wrong? But the point is this. We've got people from all walks of life. All walks of life. That's a cool thing. It's authentic. It's something where it's like, hey, yeah, that's the real deal. Like, this really is neutral territory. It's not like a channel in which we're going to put up an after show to be like, oh, hey, just to let you know, if you didn't watch carefully during the last debate, so-and-so really stunk it up. I mean, their arguments were terrible. We don't do that. It is a purely neutral channel. We are fulfilling the vision of providing a neutral platform for everybody to make their case to the world on a level playing field. We're determined to make that vision a reality. And also, folks, want to let you know, thanks so much for your kind words, by the way, Mr. Revolution 573. We do appreciate it, as well as thanks for your kind words, Hunter Thompson, and appreciate that, Travis Pratt, for your kind words. And we are absolutely excited, though. My friends, we have so many big and cool things coming up. We are going to, believe me, folks, I'm excited, and I'm hoping, for real, potentially, maybe within a year, we make it to that 100,000 mark. Now, that's ambitious. I agree, because that would mean, let's see, 50 divided by 12, that would mean like 4,000, a little over 4,000 subs a month. That's a lot, but it's possible. And even if we don't make it by then, I'm telling you, I think the growth is just going to keep becoming. It's going to just, our impact, our influence, which I think is a positive thing for YouTube, is going to keep going. And I think YouTube has our back, so to speak. I'm surprised we've never gotten an STRIKE. The reason being, I mean, we've had some juicy ones. You remember, I mean, there's some that I just deleted. I was like, I'm not risking it with that. Is atheism a hate cult? Is Christianity a hate cult? We had to keep it fair and balanced. That's why we had to host both. So we wanted, I mean, we're all about equality, folks. We're all about equity. We want to make sure that everybody is equitably offended. And so, my dear friends, Imran Khan, thanks for being here, says, hey, Modern Day Debate, I sent in a direct message to you on Twitter. I have no idea if you would respond, but I understand if you don't, since you're a busy guy. By the way, how's university? Thanks for your kind words, Imran Khan. And I will try to get to your DM ASAP. I am behind this week. Folks, I was hoping to have the 50,000 subscriber stream celebration thank you event yesterday. And then I was like, well, maybe today, but don't worry. It is scheduled for tomorrow. I have been swamped. And I'm encouraged, though. I got some really good progress on a research paper I'm working on. I'm so encouraged. I'm like, oh, I feel like what I wrote today, it wasn't much more than like 2 good-sized paragraphs. And I took like at least 2 hours of like they were like these points. It was like it has to be strong. And long story short, I am like so happy with it. I was like, oh, that's like the perfect argument, or kind of like in methods. Maybe you would say like strong methodological response, we would say in psychology. But I'm excited. Thanks for asking. And how university's going? Well, I enjoy it. Folks, if you don't know, I'm working on my doctorate, and sometimes life just, it's like a tidal wave. Sometimes I am so just exhausted and trying to keep up with everything, because I'm super encouraged about modern day debate. It is so fun, but at the same time, sometimes that it's like the last week we only had, we had 3 this week. We're gonna have 3, but it might be the case we might even on some weeks have 2 debates. That's very few for modern day debate, but it's just been so busy for me recently. And, we'll get there to where it starts to level out again, but it just kind of comes in waves. And then, but yes, Imran Khan, I will definitely try to respond to your question. And so thanks for letting me know about that. Seriously, in the chat is the best way to reach me after a stream. And so we also want to let you know, we took off earlier in the debate, we had subscribe for 60 seconds, and then your messages will still show up in chat. We turned that off because we don't want it to be like you feel strong-armed. We basically want you to subscribe because you freely choose to. And so it's a reminder to get people's attention, because a lot of times at the very start of the debate, people don't hear when I say, hey, hit that subscribe button for juicy upcoming debates. And so the idea is, when I do that little chat trick, which is new. It's got to be a new feature on YouTube. I've never seen that until the last week or so. It's a way of getting people's attention to say, hey, folks, if you didn't get that little call to action up front, do hit that subscribe button. And so it is, like I said, we removed it because we only like it being on temporarily, because it's just to get people's attention in terms of the idea of subscribing, rather than being like, ha, if you ever want to be seen in chat again, you have to subscribe. That's not what I'm trying to do to you guys. So we are excited, though, you guys. Our impact, like I said, you can think of it this way. There's an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is our subscriber count, and I am pumped about it. Seriously, it's epic, and I'm more than thankful. You guys, I am so thrilled. But it's only the tip of the iceberg. Our impact on YouTube, I'm telling you, when you look at our metrics, our viewership in terms of all the views, like it is, we've got really strong impact on YouTube. And so that for me is, I would rather, I think I've said this before, I'd rather have 10,000 views a day in terms of modern day debate YouTube channel, people actually being impacted by the content, than and I'd rather have 10,000 views a day and no subscribers, which is theoretically possible, than if you had, let's say, 200,000 subscribers and you have 1,000 views a day. I'm not trying to put anybody down in terms of, like, I'm not saying 1,000's bad or anything. I'm not trying to be mean. My only point is this, is like, we're about impact, folks. That's what we're excited about. And so you guys have made it such that our impact on YouTube has been huge. And so thank you so much for that. Brooke Chavez says, thanks, or please say hi. Hello on Twitch. You're right, Twitch. So sorry, folks. I'm behind. Ozian, good to see you. And Brooke Sparrow, thank you very much for reminding me. But yes, we do have a Twitch, folks. And I see you there. And Tapatzel, thanks for being with us in Twitch as well. We do have a Twitch, my dear friends. If you haven't checked it out, I'm excited about that. And also, if you're listening via Twitch, if you maybe didn't know we're on YouTube, we are on YouTube. It's our main platform. And La Tornado says you should host a debate at Cerro Gordo Ghost Town. Would be dope and totally random. Hey, that would be cool. I've thought about hosting a debate on whether or not DIA, which stands for Denver International Airport, because there's a lot of conspiracies and rumors about Denver International Airport, which is like an hour from my house. There's rumors that it's haunted or worse. And so I've thought about it, like, I wonder if we could host a debate at the actual airport. The Wi-Fi, I've never done a speed test while I was at the airport, I don't think. And so I'd have to test it to see if we could, but that would certainly be a fun one. But Brooke Chavez, let's see, and Sideshow Nav, good to see you. And Andrew says, ideas equal truth. Preach, James, preach. Thanks, Andrew, for your support. I appreciate it. And Pancake of Destiny says, where is the 50,000 bathtub special, James? That's tomorrow. It's going to be on the Twitch hot tubs and bathtubs in pools category. You don't want to miss it. Amazing. But yes. And yes, Church of Entropy is a hippie. There's no doubt about it. But let's see. Shogun says, have a great weekend, chat. Keep growing. Thanks for your kind words, Shogun. And actually, Church of Entropy surprises me. Sometimes Church of Entropy, I have to give credit in terms of being, I wouldn't say a contrarian, but potentially. But Church of Entropy will surprise you in terms of reviews. Like sometimes I hear about reviews and I'm like, oh, interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. You're not as predictable as most people. I'll give you that, Church of Entropy. And then, not Mod Bruce Wayne says, make a channel called Modern Night Debate that runs overnight, debates for night owls. Oh, that's a funny idea. I like that. And then, and I like the day and night play. Will Stewart says your mic is clipping a bit tonight. That's probably just because I'm like so pumped and loud. But thanks for letting me know. It's been amazing. Actually, you know what? It feels like when I look at the meter, I'm watching it right now on OBS. It's not bouncing. I can't even get it to go to the very top. I'm confused by that. So I don't know. I'm surprised it clips, even though I'm not in the red. I'm in the yellow. But we'll talk. I've got to learn more about it. Hannah Anderson says, don't jinx it, James. Then Mr. P says, start an OnlyFans for the curtain, James. 1,000 will be a breeze. Don't undersell that talent. That's funny. That's right. What is behind the curtain? I may show you. I mean, you got to hit that like button. I mean, we got to get to at least, you guys, we're only at 146. There's 216 watching. Folks, hit that like button. I always imagine, well, two things. One, you might be thinking, James, why is it that there's 146 likes? There's 217 people watching. Why are those last 50 or so holding out? I mean, really, it's like 69 right now that are holding out. I always imagine maybe, one, they're in the bathtub. Their hands are wet. They don't want to get their phone wet by reaching over to grab it. Two, they were listening to Modern Day Debate, the debate tonight, and then unfortunately they were kidnapped by terrorists, and now they, it's like their phone is still on play, but they're like, maybe the phone is like over here, and their hands are tied up behind their back, so it's still playing, but they can't stop it. But they're at least happy that they get to listen to Modern Day Debate while they're kidnapped. So, okay, so I'm sorry. But let's see. You guys, I am stoked. Let's see. Ken Lee, thanks for being with us, as well as Alex and Nikki, that's right in. The Acorn, good to see you. Wilmar Castro, good to see you. Says 5D chess. I like it. Amen to that. And then Sergio Miguel, thanks for dropping in. Forward Tribe, we're glad you're here. Said, impact, our crazy world needs debate. Long live Modern Day Debate. Thanks for your support, my friend. That means a lot. And then, let's see here. Chat's moving on me. I'm trying to keep up. Oh, Will Stewart says it must be the headphones. It is clipping. I didn't even know that. I'm glad you let me know that. That's right. Who is it that said Boomer Tech? The Acorn is right. Boomer Tech. Oh, man. You guys remember our first, I think it was like our first year. Oh, it was so bad. Whew. Oh, snap. Brooke, was your name removed from the Patreon credits? I'm so sorry. I can fix it right now, actually. I didn't know it was removed. I'm going to do this right now. You're going to be the very first person. Brooke Chavis. Okay, it's fixed. No joke. Watch, you'll see when it comes to the very front of the ticker, you'll see. But yes, I am pumped, you guys. Let's see. Oh. Well, I don't know how I can increase the volume on the computer. Seriously, this is as high as it goes. Well, okay. Maybe this will help. So maybe that, man, this thing is all messed up. Do I look like some sort of like Zoomer? Is Zoomer the opposite of Boomer? Is Zoomer like a person who is like young and hip? I'm still with it. I tell you guys this all the time. Now, I don't even know what an interocitor is, but Church of Entropy says the mic is, it's clipping because you're too close, the reverb. Thank you, Sergio Miguel, for your kind words, and thank you for that feedback, Church of Entropy. I wish I knew what the heck this thing is. I just purchased it. I pulled it out of the box. I plugged it in, and there are all these like switches and meters. It's like, have you guys ever seen the old He-Man movie with Dolph Lundgren? You remember the time machine that, what was the name of the little elf? Basically, they had the time key, and it's like, that's what this is like. It's got that many buttons. That's how confusing it is for me. So, I mean, bear with me. But Brooke Chavez says, I noticed during the Matt D debate, thanks, James. My pleasure, and I'm so sorry. I had no idea. It was honestly not, it was for sure not on purpose. So, Divine Apex Production says, did I miss the debate already? You did. You're amazingly late. So, it's going to be here on the channel, though. Nothing tonight was worthy of making the debate such that it would only be on the podcast. Get what I mean? Next, Captain Dip, thanks for coming by. Elizabeth Marin, thanks so much for dropping in. Says James has a great last name. It's Coons. So in case you didn't know how to pronounce it, it is James Coons, and it's obviously, probably pretty obvious, it's a German name. I'm German, I'm Belgian, I'm French. Let's see. I'm Polish. You name it. I'm it. Japanese. I'm pretty much everything. So I am like the Renaissance man of ethnicities, but actually I'm like a pretty, like, I'm like pretty pale. I am like the palest, easy to sunburn type person. Maybe not the easiest. I've had redheaded friends, those poor people, daywalkers, but let's see. Brooke Chavez. Oh, okay. I'm catching up with the chat. I always just enjoy hanging out here with you guys. It's always fun. I should go because I actually have to finish a lot of work tonight. So I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm like, dear gosh, I actually do have a lot of work tonight. So I'm glad it's only 8. We're still okay. But Church of Entropy, let's see. So OBS has a volume adjuster. I know that. Church of Entropy. I'm hip. I'm with it. I know, like, believe me. I turned it up as high as I could. Now, the other thing is, I've got so many burps. If I like pause in my talking, it might be because I have burps. Let's see. What was it? Oh, yes. Do you seriously, none of you guys, oh wait, Generation Z is a Zoomer? Oh gosh. That's embarrassing. What are like the 20-year-olds? Like Dylan Burns is like 22, right? What would we call Dylan? He's not a Zoomer? Dear gosh, it just gets more confusing. But you guys, seriously, you don't know the name of the elf, the little guy, the short guy in the original He-Man movie with the time key, which looks like this? You don't know what his name was? Oh, it was like Eeyore or Igor? I can't remember. Now, speaking of movies, I am so far behind. I watched Edge of Tomorrow recently. You guys have probably seen Edge of Tomorrow. It's with it's Tom Cruise. I watched it, and I got it on Amazon Prime Day for a deal. I rented it for like $1.99 or something. I mean, that's usually what it has to be for me to go for it. I'm frugal. So I rented it. And I thought, wow, I got a great deal. I got this brand new movie. It's from like 2014. That's how behind I am on movies. I don't even know. I watched also, what was it called? Man, you guys, I thought it was new. I was like, oh, it's probably from the last 3 years. The Wolf of Wall Street. By the way, like, you guys really didn't warn me about that. That movie, I don't think I've ever seen a movie like that. Now, the idea is this. We'll talk about that a different day. The point I'm making is that I thought it was like from the last few years. It's from like 2013 or something. Gee. So I am so behind on movies. It's frightening. At least I'll admit it. Dr. Let's see. Mengel, we're glad you're here. And then Wilmar Castro, we're glad you're here. As well as YouTube Surgeon General says Orko. No, actually, I think in the cartoon that was his name. I don't remember what it was in the movie. I don't think it was in the movie, but I could be wrong. I'm just gonna look it up. He-Man, Dolph. Okay, Masters of the Universe came out in 1987. You know that it was great because that was the year I was born. And yes, I was born in 1987. Boomer! And let's see. Let me look up the characters. So if you guys haven't seen Masters of the Universe, first of all, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. It's like the greatest movie ever. Dolph Lundgren has this crimson cape, and it's maybe the reason, I think it honestly is the reason why crimson is my favorite color. Since I was a kid, I always just thought it was like the most beautiful cape. Beautiful is not quite the right word. It's just enticing. It's juicy. And so on the planet Eternia, at the center of the universe, Skeletor's army seizes Castle Grayskull. Gwindor! That was the name of him. So Orko, I think, was in the cartoon. I think you're right. But then it was Gwindor in the movie. So, but yeah, I want to say thank you guys for all of your support. Thank you for everything. Lewis Barnett says, what's your favorite Star Wars movie? I think it's actually, despite this being, some people are like, no, it has to be Empire Strikes Back. I get it. If you lived through it, it's kind of like what we lived through when we watched Star Wars episode, what would that be, 8. When Kylo told, now this is, it's not a spoiler because I'm just saying what he said. You know, it's not like it's anything crazy that he says this because you don't know if it's true or not. When Kylo told Rey at the end of The Last Jedi that her parents were like losers who left her, really not very tasteful. The idea here is we were left on a cliffhanger for 2 years or so. It didn't seem like 2 years. It seemed like it was way faster than that because anything compared to watching The Last Jedi makes it seem like time is moving fast because The Last Jedi just feels like time is like stopped. It's that bad. But for real, so sorry. I know some of you guys like it. I didn't like it. And don't do the, it's James doesn't like female lead characters. Like, no, that's not it. I loved Rogue One. Rogue One was like Rogue One is up there. We'll come back to that point. But I didn't like Last Jedi. Now, the idea is this. I will admit it was cool because it had a similar cliffhanger to Empire Strikes Back. Rian Johnson left us wondering, was Kylo Ren telling the truth or was he just saying that Rey's parents abandoned her, right? Oh, Gwildor. That actually, yeah, that sounds right. I think you're right about that, Oliver Catwell. And Beastmaster. Yeah, I remember. I do. He was scary in that movie. He looked like a werewolf. Now, the idea here is I get why that's right. General Balzac says Courtney Cox. That's right. Courtney Cox was in it. She had to be like 17 or 18 or something. I don't know, but she was really young. So it was a pretty old movie. Boomer. Now, the trick is this. If you lived at the time that Empire Strikes Back came out, well then yes, you experienced the cliffhanger of actually not knowing if Darth Vader really was Luke's father. I get it. I'm like, okay. But for those of us who didn't, if I didn't get to experience that, I have to say Return of the Jedi is my favorite. Empire Strikes Back is close, but it's still number 2. Rogue One is pretty high up there. Man, probably put it above New Hope. Then I'd probably go with A New Hope. Then I'd probably go with Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith I should maybe bump up a few spots. Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace are like, I don't know. They're Attack of the Clones, Phantom Menace, and Han Solo are all tied for the next best spot. If you made me not pick, if I had to put those in order, gosh, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I guess maybe Han Solo. I don't know. I do like Darth Maul. So everybody, you'd be crazy not to like Darth Maul. And I hope he gets his own spin-off series. Now the rumor is Luke is going to get his own spin-off series. That feels like it's sacred. It's kind of like, hey guys, if you want to make up your own character and take a risk with it, like Mandalorian. So Mando, it turned out great. He's cool. Great story. Everything was great. But if it tanked, I wouldn't have felt like I lost anything. It was just like, oh, Disney swung and missed. But if they tank a Luke Skywalker series, I feel like they're taking something wonderful and driving it into the ground. And so I do feel like I'd lose something in that case. It's like, don't mess around with Luke or his story unless, just be careful. If you're going to do it, I hope they do it well. And maybe they will. I mean, I've got to give them credit. Mandalorian was great. Is that the only Star Wars show they've had? At least live action wise, it is. That's crazy. Dave Hill, I remember it was like years ago. It was like 5 or 6, maybe it was even 7 years ago. There were rumors of a live action show of Star Wars. And I was like, wow, wouldn't that be something? And it was. But Dave Hill says, it's okay, Last Jedi was horrible. I have to say, I don't know why. I sometimes wonder, like, Star Wars got a little political. People who lean politically left, I'm going to say it, I think they get pissed. Well, not all of them. Some, I think. They really want The Last Jedi to be a good Star Wars movie, even though it wasn't that good. And I just can't help it. And I'm like, am I wrong about that? Like, I kind of feel like not all people on the left, but I feel like there's got to be a correlation. If I asked you the degree to which you identified with politically left, politically right, it's probably like a small R value, small effect size. It would be correlated with your political position. Now, I'm not hinting at my political position. I think I'm somewhat moderate, no joke. I really do. But anyway, Bubblegum Gun, thanks for your super chat, says, Kriya, best Star Wars character. Fact, Knights of the Old Republic, the best. Juicy. Now, did I trigger everybody with that comment about your political positions? So, Andrew says you are wrong about Star Wars. Andrew, I bet you voted for Biden. And I know you did. Let's see. But it's okay. And here's the thing. It's interesting. I think it got politicized. And it's like, it's not, that was such a turnoff when some critics of Star Wars were like, man, it wasn't good. And it was like, well, we loved Leia though. Leia in the original trilogy was a strong character. She was already telling people, you remember she was like almost like general level status on Hoth. She was like telling everybody what to do, and everybody took it seriously and nobody had any problems with it. As well as she killed the most dangerous gangster in the planet, Jabba the Hutt, in Return of the Jedi. Like, Leia was serious. She was like tough. And so, wow, Andrew, you surprised me. Says yes, politically left, and I hated the new Star Wars. Well, then I am as wrong as it gets. You're the first I think I've ever met of somebody who like clearly identifies as politically left and would say they hate the new ones. So I'm surprised. Now, so you proved me wrong. It's a small correlation. Nephilim Free is in the house. Oh boy, here he goes. And Reswat, of course, says Battle Beyond the Stars had a spaceship with boobs. Appreciate you letting me know that. Duly noted. And so Forward Tribe says, are movies being destroyed by fanatical political correctness? Debate idea. That's a juicy one. I mean, so I always loved Leia in the original Star Wars. So it was never like anything about, and like I said, I love Rogue One. It was never about like female or male leads. And I'd also be willing to like I just didn't really like all of Hayden Christensen's work. It wasn't terrible. I don't want to be hard on him, but like, it's hard to duplicate what Luke did, right? And so, I don't know. I'm being hard on him, but nonetheless, Forward Tribe says are movies. Oh yeah, and then General Balzac says, and looked good doing it. I don't know who you're talking about. Oh yeah, Leia. Yeah, I mean Carrie Fisher was cute when she was young. Like, there are like these pictures of her where she was like on Hoth, the scene, and she was like just like teasing and like winking. And you know what the funny thing is? Raw nakedness, stupid whore energy. One time she had a picture of Leia winking, and I recognized it even though it's so small on the screen, because I always thought, I just thought Carrie Fisher looked like so cute in that picture, and I was like, oh my gosh, I would have, if we were the same age, I would have had the biggest crush on the world on Carrie Fisher. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. I've got to go, but it's been fun. I love talking about Star Wars and movies. Thank you guys for sharing your insights. I love it when you prove me wrong. So thank you guys. I love you guys. Seriously, thanks for all of your support. We will be back tomorrow with 2 streams. One with Fight the Flat Earth debate. It's coming back. And one on 50,000 thank you celebration stream. I'm excited for it, you guys. So thank you for everything. I love you guys. Seriously, wherever you are, no matter what continent, no matter what your view is, no matter what your background or walk of life is, we hope you feel welcome and we appreciate you. Thanks, everybody. We love you guys. And we will see you next time. Amazing. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable, everybody. And we'll see you tomorrow night. Thanks, everybody.